The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Collective rose from his crystalline seat. His four eyes swept across the assembled delegates, each representing a different species from across the galaxy. The weight of his announcement would shake the very foundations of their peaceful civilization. Honored delegates, Kethvar's voice resonated through the translation devices. We face an unprecedented crisis. The Void Seekers have emerged from dark space. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Void Seekers were legends, nightmare stories told to young ones across 1,000 worlds. Ancient machines of unknown origin that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. They had vanished millennia ago, and most species had begun to believe they were merely myths. Our deep space monitoring stations in the Outer Rim have gone dark, Kethvar continued, his tentacles trembling slightly. 17 systems have been completely stripped of all matter. Planets, moons, even the stars themselves have been harvested by these mechanical horrors. Delegate Yixandra of the Hive Minds clicked her mandibles nervously. What do our military projections suggest? Can our combined fleet stand against them? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Every species present knew the answer, but none wanted to voice it. Their ships, designed for exploration and minimal conflict resolution, would be like insects against a hurricane. The Galactic Council had enjoyed 3,000 years of peace, and their military capabilities had atrophied accordingly. Our tactical computers estimate we would need at least 50,000 ships to have any chance of stopping even a small Void Seeker fleet, Admiral Threndock of the Stellar Navy reported grimly. We currently have fewer than 8,000 vessels spread across the entire galaxy. The chamber erupted in panicked chittering, concerned humming, and various other expressions of distress unique to each species. Delegate after delegate stood to voice their concerns, each painted with the same brush of hopelessness. Perhaps we should consider evacuation protocols, suggested Elder Morgeth of the Ancient Communion. We could retreat beyond the Galactic Rim, find sanctuary in dark space until they pass. And abandon our homeworlds? Our entire civilization? Kethvar's voice carried the weight of billions of souls. There must be another way. That's when researcher Plixana of the Archive Collective activated her holographic display. The diminutive being, no larger than a human child but possessing one of the greatest minds in the galaxy, had been quietly reviewing historical data during the debate. There is one possibility, she announced, her voice barely above a whisper yet somehow commanding the attention of every being present. The Deathworlders. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the silence of fear but of disbelief. Every delegate knew about the third planet of the Sol system, that tiny blue-green world that harbored the most violent, aggressive, and inexplicably resilient species the galaxy had ever encountered. Humans, they called themselves. The archives contain records of their military capabilities, Plixana continued, manipulating her holographic display to show classified files. In the 300 years since first contact, they've been involved in 17 separate conflicts. They've never lost a single war. That's because they fight like maniacs, muttered General Vexith of the warrior clans. They're barely civilized. Their homeworld is a Class 12 death world that should have killed their species in its infancy. Precisely, Plixana nodded. They've evolved under conditions that would annihilate any of our species within days. Extreme weather, deadly predators, toxic atmospheres in some regions, gravitational forces that would crush most of us, and radiation levels that would be lethal to anyone without their natural adaptations. The researcher changed her display to show human military vessels. The ships appeared crude compared to the elegant designs of Council species, but there was something undeniably intimidating about their angular, aggressive lines. Their ship designs prioritize durability and firepower over aesthetics. Their weapons are devastating and their tactics are unconventional. Where we would send a diplomatic envoy, they send a battle group. Where we would negotiate, they attack first and ask questions later. You're suggesting we ask barbarians to save civilization? Kethvar's four eyes narrowed in disbelief. I'm suggesting we ask survivors to do what they do best, Plixana replied firmly. Survive and help others survive with them. The humans have a saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Perhaps it's time we learned what that truly means. The debate that followed raged for hours. Some delegates argued that involving humans would be like unleashing one plague to fight another. Others pointed out that the Void Seekers represented extinction for all galactic civilization, making any alliance preferable to annihilation. Finally, Kethvar called for order. The choice before us is simple. We can face certain destruction maintaining our dignity, or we can swallow our pride and ask the Deathworlders for help. I know which option gives our children a future. The vote was closer than many expected, but the decision was made. A diplomatic mission would be sent to Sol System, specifically to Earth, to formally request military assistance from humanity against the Void Seeker threat. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, many wondered if they were making the right choice. They were about to discover that when you're facing extinction, sometimes the best option is to call upon those who've made survival their specialty. The humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting for their lives against a hostile universe. Now, for the first time, they would fight for someone else's life as well. The galaxy was about to learn that Deathworlders didn't send a hand to help. They sent everything they had because that's what survival required. And if there was one thing humans understood better than any species in the galaxy, it was the brutal mathematics of survival. The message was already being prepared for transmission to Earth. Help us before it's too late. Little did the Council know that they were about to witness what happened when an unstoppable force met an unmovable species that refused to give up. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful dreadnought, watching Earth grow smaller in the view screen. The emergency session at the United Nations had lasted 18 hours, but the decision had been unanimous for the first time in decades. When an entire galaxy asked for help, humanity answered. The Council's message had arrived 3 days ago, transmitted through diplomatic channels that had remained mostly ceremonial since first contact. The Galactic Council had always treated humans as dangerous primitives, useful only for their willingness to handle dangerous mining operations and frontier security that other species couldn't stomach. Now, suddenly, they needed those same barbaric qualities to save them from extinction. Admiral, Commander Rodriguez approached with a tablet displaying fleet status reports. The Terran Defense Fleet is assembled and ready. 250 ships including 37 heavy dreadnoughts, 86 cruisers and 127 destroyers and frigates. Chen nodded, though her expression remained grim. That's everything we can spare without leaving Earth defenseless. What about the other human colonies? Mars is contributing 40 ships. The Europa Mining Consortium is sending their entire security fleet of 60 vessels, and even the Outer Rim settlements are scraping together whatever they have. Total human response will be over 400 ships. The numbers seemed impressive until Chen considered what they were facing. According to Council intelligence, the Void Seekers operated fleets numbered in the thousands. Each individual Void Seeker vessel was reportedly the size of a small city, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shielding that had withstood the combined might of dead civilizations. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Park called from the communications station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Council escort fleet. They're requesting permission to come aboard and brief us on the enemy. Tell them to dock in Bay 7, Chen replied. "And Lieutenant?" "Make sure our Marines are present. Full dress uniform but armed. I want these aliens to understand exactly who they're dealing with." 30 minutes later, Ambassador Kethvar followed his aide through the corridors of the human dreadnought. The differences between human ship design and Council vessels were immediately apparent. Where Council ships prioritized comfort and efficiency, human ships prioritized function and survivability. Every surface seemed to serve a purpose. Every corridor was wide enough for rapid troop movement, and blast doors were visible at regular intervals. The ambassador's four eyes took in details that his briefings had failed to capture. Human crew members moved with a predatory efficiency that made his skin crawl. Their eyes constantly scanned their environment, and he could see weapon placement points throughout the ship. Even their clothing seemed designed for combat readiness rather than comfort. "This way, Ambassador," Chen greeted them at the airlock, flanked by two Marines whose mere presence seemed to fill the corridor with barely contained violence. "Welcome aboard the UES Defiance." The briefing room was stark and functional, dominated by a massive holographic display table. Chen gestured for the aliens to sit, noting how they instinctively placed themselves near the exits. Fear was a universal language, apparently. Let's skip the pleasantries, Chen began without preamble. Show us what we're fighting. Kethvar activated his portable holographic projector, and the room filled with the nightmarish forms of Void Seeker vessels. They were organic-looking despite being purely mechanical, like someone had crossed a spider with a cancer cell and given it engines. Each ship was studded with harvesting tools that could strip the surface off a planet in hours. Void Seekers operate in hive fleets, Kethvar explained, his voice barely steady. Each ship is autonomous but connected to the collective. They've consumed 17 star systems in the past 6 months. Our defensive fleets were swept aside like debris. Casualties? Commander Rodriguez asked. Total, the ambassador replied quietly. They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They simply harvest everything organic and inorganic, then move on to the next system. Chen studied the display with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. Weapons capabilities? Plasma cannons capable of melting through our strongest shields in seconds, harvesting beams that can strip matter at the molecular level, and they deploy smaller drones by the millions. Weaknesses? Kethavar's tentacles drooped. None that our scientists have identified. They adapt to any attack pattern within minutes. Their hulls seem to be made of some sort of self-repairing metal. Even when we managed to destroy individual ships, they simply absorbed the wreckage and rebuilt stronger versions. The human officers exchanged glances that made the ambassador nervous. There was something in their expressions that reminded him why his species had classified Earth as a death world. These weren't beings who gave up when faced with impossible odds. They were beings who got angry. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Kim spoke up from her position at the tactical station. Preliminary analysis suggests their adaptive systems might have a processing limitation. If we could hit them with enough different attack vectors simultaneously, they'd have to choose which adaptations to prioritize. Chen finished. Interesting. What else? Their coordination appears to be based on some form of quantum entanglement network, Rodriguez added, studying the technical data. If we could disrupt that, they'd revert to individual ship tactics instead of fleet coordination. Chen nodded approvingly. Good thinking. What about their harvesting operations? Kethvar looked confused. I don't understand the relevance. Everything has a weakness, Chen explained patiently. The question is whether you're willing to exploit it. Your people fight like prey animals. You retreat when threatened. You minimize losses. You negotiate when possible. Admirable traits for a peaceful civilization. The admiral stood and walked to the holographic display, studying the Void Seeker ships with the focused intensity of a hawk examining a mouse. But we're not prey animals, she continued. We're apex predators. We've been fighting for survival since our species crawled out of the primordial ooze. When we're threatened, we don't just fight back. We fight to win no matter the cost. What are you suggesting? The ambassador asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. I'm suggesting that the Void Seekers have never encountered an enemy that fights the way we do, Chen replied. They've adapted to fighting rational opponents who retreat when faced with superior firepower. They've never fought someone crazy enough to ram a dreadnought into their largest ship just to see what happens. The silence in the briefing room stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Kethvar spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. The Council authorized me to place all remaining military assets under human command. Our fleets will follow your orders. Chen smiled, and the expression made the ambassador's blood freeze. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed the keys to the largest military force in galactic history, and was already planning how to use it. Tell your fleets to form up behind ours, Chen ordered. And Ambassador? Send a message back to the Council. Tell them the cavalry is coming. And when we arrive, the Void Seekers are going to learn why you don't pick a fight with Deathworlders. As the alien delegation departed, Chen turned to her officers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have work to do. Let's show these mechanical parasites what humans do to things that threaten our friends. The fleet began to move. 400 human ships leading nearly 8,000 council vessels toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. For the first time since the crisis began, there was hope. Because when you're facing extinction, sometimes the best answer is to call in someone who specializes in impossible fights. The Void Seekers were about to meet humanity. They would quickly discover that there's a significant difference between consuming a peaceful civilization and trying to harvest a species that considers warfare an art form. The Kepler 442 system had once been home to the Ashanti civilization, a peaceful species of crystalline beings who had spent centuries perfecting their art and philosophy. Now it was a graveyard. Where once there had been 7 inhabited worlds, only empty space remained. Even the system's star burned dimmer, its outer layers partially harvested by the mechanical horror that had consumed everything else. Captain Marcus Webb watched the sensor readings from the bridge of his stealth reconnaissance frigate, the UES Shadowrunner. His crew had spent the last 48 hours gathering intelligence on Void Seeker operations, and what they'd learned made his blood run cold. "Captain," Ensign Torres called from the sensor station, her voice tight with barely controlled terror, "we're detecting massive movement in the asteroid field. At least 300 individual signatures, each one the size of a heavy cruiser." Webb studied the display, watching the mechanical swarm tear through what remained of the system's asteroid belt like locusts through a wheat field. Each Void Seeker ship moved with predatory grace, their harvesting arms stripping metal and rare minerals with frightening efficiency. "Any sign of the main fleet?" Webb asked. "Negative, sir. These appear to be cleanup crews. Intelligence suggests the primary hive fleet moved on to the next system after stripping the planets." Webb nodded grimly. The Void Seekers' tactics were becoming clear. They sent massive fleets to crack planets and harvest the bulk materials, then left smaller groups behind to collect whatever remained. It was efficient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. "Sir," Communications Officer Patel spoke up, "we're receiving a coded transmission from Admiral Chen. The combined fleet has arrived at the rally point." "About time," Webb muttered. "Send them our intelligence package and tell them we're maintaining position for real-time updates." "And Patel? Make sure they understand what they're walking into." 2 days later, the largest military fleet in galactic history dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of over 8,000 ships. The sight should have filled her with confidence. Instead, it reminded her just how outmatched they really were. "Fleet status report," she ordered. "All human vessels reporting ready for combat," Commander Rodriguez replied. "Council fleets are somewhat less prepared. Their tactical systems aren't designed for the kind of engagement we're planning." Chen had spent the voyage reviewing Council military doctrine, and it explained a lot about why they were losing so badly. Their entire philosophy centered around minimal casualties and proportional response. They fought like they were participating in a sporting event with rules and referees. What's the word from reconnaissance? Captain Webb reports approximately 300 Void Seeker vessels in the asteroid field, plus heavy automated defenses around the harvested planet's orbital positions. "No sign of the main fleet." "Perfect," Chen smiled coldly. "This is exactly what we need. A manageable enemy force to test our tactics against before we face the real threat." Ambassador Kethvar approached from his observer position, his 4 eyes reflecting deep concern. "Admiral, with respect, 300 Void Seeker vessels destroyed our entire defensive fleet of 500 ships. Perhaps we should consider a more cautious approach." "Ambassador," Chen turned to face him, "let me explain something about human military philosophy. When we encounter an enemy, we don't just fight to win. We fight to send a message. Today's message is going to be very clear." She activated the fleet-wide communication system, and her voice carried to every ship in the Armada. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Today we begin humanity's first galactic war. Our enemy has made the mistake of threatening our friends and neighbors. They've consumed peaceful civilizations and turned thriving worlds into empty space. This ends now." The Admiral paused, looking out at the vast formation of ships stretching beyond visual range. "Human vessels will spearhead the assault. Council ships will provide support and cover our flanks. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species that calls this galaxy home. We're fighting for the future of galactic civilization, and we're fighting to show these mechanical parasites that there are some things in this universe they can't consume." The attack began with humanity's trademark subtlety, which is to say none at all. Instead of probing attacks or gradual escalation, the human fleet launched everything they had in a simultaneous alpha strike, designed to overwhelm Void Seeker adaptive systems. Nuclear missiles filled space like angry hornets, each one programmed with different approach vectors and detonation patterns. Plasma cannons fired in rotating frequency patterns that prevented adaptation. Kinetic projectiles launched from railguns created a web of destruction that no amount of maneuvering could avoid. The Void Seekers, for the first time in millennia, faced an enemy that didn't fight fair. Captain Sarah Kim, commanding the destroyer UES Wolverine, watched her tactical display with savage satisfaction as her ship's missiles found their targets. Engineering, give me everything the engines have. Weapons, continuous fire on all targets of opportunity. Show these bastards what happens when they mess with our neighborhood. The initial exchange was devastating. Void Seeker ships designed to adapt to gradual escalation found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer variety and intensity of human weapons. Ships that had survived centuries of galactic warfare were reduced to scrap in minutes, but the Void Seekers were learning. Admiral, Rodriguez called urgently, enemy ships are adapting faster than projected. They're developing countermeasures to our weapons in real time. Then we adapt faster, Chen replied calmly. Signal all ships switch to secondary attack protocols. Let's see them adapt to this. The human fleet suddenly shifted tactics. Ships that had been firing missiles began launching kinetic projectiles. Energy weapons switched frequencies and targeting patterns. Some ships even began ramming maneuvers, using their superior armor and human stubbornness to literally bash Void Seeker vessels apart. The Council fleet watched in amazement and horror as human ships engaged in tactics that their own military computers classified as suicidal. Yet somehow it was working. Void Seeker adaptation systems designed to counter rational tactical decisions couldn't cope with opponents who seemed to operate on pure aggression and spite. This is insane, muttered Captain Vexith from his position aboard the Council command ship. They're treating this like a bar fight on a planetary scale. And it's working, Admiral Threndock replied grimly. Look at the casualty reports. We're destroying them faster than they can adapt. The battle raged for 6 hours, and when it was over, the asteroid field was filled with the wreckage of 300 Void Seeker vessels. The human fleet had lost 37 ships, while the Council forces had lost only 12, mostly due to staying safely behind human lines. As the last enemy ship exploded in a ball of plasma, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Then she turned to the holographic display showing the rest of the galaxy. This was just a skirmish, she announced to the fleet. The real Void Seeker fleets are out there, probably heading for the next populated system. But today we proved something important. They're not invincible. They can be beaten. She paused, looking at the tactical displays that showed probable Void Seeker fleet movements. And we're going to beat them. Every last one of them. Because that's what humans do when someone threatens our friends. We don't just help. We solve the problem permanently. Ambassador Kethvar watched the celebration aboard the human ships and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Perhaps asking the Deathworlders for help hadn't been a desperate mistake. Perhaps it had been exactly what the galaxy needed. The Void Seekers had spent millennia consuming peaceful civilizations. Now they were about to discover what happened when they tried to consume a civilization that fought back not just with weapons, but with the absolute refusal to give up that had carried humanity from the caves of Earth to the stars themselves. The war for galactic survival had begun, and for the first time the prey had turned into hunters. 3 weeks after the victory at Kepler 442, the combined fleet received the news that Admiral Chen had been dreading. Long-range sensors had detected the main Void Seeker hive fleet moving toward the Centauri cluster, home to over 40 billion souls across 12 inhabited worlds. The mechanical swarm numbered in the thousands, far larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Elena Vasquez, humanity's leading xenobiologist and now the fleet's chief intelligence analyst, stood before the assembled command staff in the UES Defiance's main briefing room. Her holographic display showed the terrifying scope of what they faced. The hive fleet consists of approximately 4,000 individual vessels, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the threat. The largest ships are roughly 15 kilometers in length, essentially mobile space stations equipped with planet-cracking weapons. Admiral Chen studied the formation patterns with the calculating gaze that had made her humanity's youngest fleet admiral. Time to target? At their current speed, they'll reach the outer worlds of the Centauri cluster in 72 hours, Dr. Vasquez replied. Our fastest ships could intercept them in 48 hours, but we'd be arriving piecemeal. Unacceptable, Chen stated flatly. We arrive together or we don't arrive at all. What about the civilian evacuation? Ambassador Kethvar activated his own display, showing the desperate exodus already underway. Every available transport is moving civilians away from the projected battle zone, but with 40 billion beings to evacuate, not everyone's going to make it, Chen finished grimly, which means we don't have the luxury of retreat. We win this fight or those people die. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation and desperate strategizing. Human engineers had worked around the clock with their council counterparts, sharing weapons technology and tactical innovations that had been military secrets for generations. The result was a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, equipped with hybrid weapon systems that combined human aggression with council precision. Commander Rodriguez pulled up tactical projections that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Even with our technological advantages, the numbers are overwhelming. 4,000 enemy ships against our 8,000 might sound manageable, but their individual ships are exponentially more powerful than ours. Then we don't fight fair, Chen replied simply. Dr. Vasquez, what did your analysis reveal about their hive mind communication system? The scientist's expression brightened slightly. We've identified what appears to be a central command ship, approximately 20 kilometers long and positioned at the heart of their formation. If we could destroy it, the entire fleet loses coordination, Chen nodded, but getting through 4,000 ships to reach their command vessel is essentially impossible. Unless we don't go through them, Colonel Sarah Reeves suggested from her position at the Marine Tactical Station. What if we go around them? The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Finally, Admiral Threndock of the Council Forces spoke up. You're suggesting a flanking maneuver? With respect, Admiral Chen, the Void Seekers have spherical formation protocols. There is no around them. Chen smiled, and once again her expression made the alien delegates nervous. Colonel Reeves, explain your thinking. The Void Seekers have been adapting to conventional three-dimensional space combat, Reeves began, activating a tactical hologram. But humans have something they've never encountered before. We have experience fighting in gravity wells. The hologram shifted to show the nearby system's gas giant, a massive world with crushing gravity and violent atmospheric storms. Reeves highlighted a trajectory that would take ships directly through the planet's upper atmosphere. If we could modify our ship's heat shielding and navigate through the atmospheric boundary, we could use the gravity well to slingshot directly at their command ship. The Void Seekers would never expect an attack vector that requires atmospheric flight capability. That's completely insane, muttered Captain Vexith. The atmospheric pressure alone would crush most ships, and the electromagnetic interference would disable our weapon systems. Exactly, Chen grinned. Which means they won't see us coming until it's too late. The next 24 hours were a frantic scramble to modify the human fleet for atmospheric operations. Human ships, originally designed to operate in Earth's violent weather systems and crushing gravity, required minimal modifications. Council vessels needed extensive retrofitting, and many simply couldn't handle the stress. Dr. Vasquez worked with human and alien engineers to develop specialized sensor packages that could function in the gas giant's electromagnetic chaos. Meanwhile, Admiral Chen refined the attack plan with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that had made human military planning legendary. We'll split into 3 groups, she explained to the assembled fleet commanders. Alpha Group, consisting of our fastest ships, will engage the Void Seeker fleet head-on and draw their attention. Beta Group will swing wide and attack their flanks. And Charlie Group, our most heavily armored ships, will execute the atmospheric approach. She paused, looking at each commander individually. I want to be clear about something. This isn't a mission where everyone comes home. We're going to take casualties, heavy casualties. But if we succeed, we save 40 billion lives and probably break the back of the Void Seeker threat. The attack began 18 hours later, as the combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, where the Void Seeker Hive fleet was already beginning their approach to the first inhabited world. Captain Webb, now commanding a modified heavy cruiser, led Alpha Group in the initial engagement. All ships, this is Phoenix Leader. Light them up and keep their attention. Make them think this is our main attack. The space between fleets exploded with weapons fire as human and council ships launched everything they had at the mechanical swarm. The Void Seekers responded exactly as predicted, adapting their formation to counter the frontal assault and sending thousands of smaller ships to engage the attackers. Meanwhile, Charlie Group was already beginning their descent into the gas giant's atmosphere. Admiral Chen personally led this group, taking the UES Defiance into a flight regime that no human ship had ever attempted before. "Engineering, report," she called as the ship began to shake from atmospheric turbulence. "Hull temperature rising but within acceptable limits," Chief Engineer Martinez replied. "Navigation systems are functioning, but we're flying blind except for short-range sensors." The descent through the gas giant's atmosphere was like flying through hell itself. Lightning storms the size of continents erupted around them, and electromagnetic interference turned their sensor screens into static snow. But human ships had been designed to operate in Earth's violent weather, and they handled the punishment better than anyone had dared hope. "Admiral," Communications Officer Patel called out, "we're receiving scattered reports from Alpha and Beta groups. They're taking heavy casualties, but they're holding the Void Seeker's attention." Chen nodded grimly. Good people were dying to give her attack group this chance. She wasn't going to waste it. "All ships, this is Defiance. Gravity assist burn in 30 seconds. After that, we're committed to this course. Make sure your weapons are ready, because we're only going to get one shot at this." The slingshot maneuver around the gas giant was a testament to human engineering and pilot skill. Ships that had been designed for deep space combat suddenly found themselves pulling maneuvers that would have been at home in a fighter jet. Dogfight on Earth as they emerged. From the gas giant's gravitational field, Charlie Group found themselves perfectly positioned behind the Void Seeker command ship. For the first time in the battle, surprise was on their side. "Target acquired," Weapons Officer Kim announced. "Void Seeker command vessel bearing 00 Mark 15. Range 200 kilometers and closing." Chen looked at the massive enemy ship on her display. It was easily 10 times the size of her dreadnought, bristling with weapons and probably containing the collective intelligence that coordinated the entire Hive fleet. "All ships, concentrate fire on the command vessel. Everything we have, everything at once. Let's end this." The space around the Void Seeker command ship erupted in nuclear fire as every weapon in Charlie Group fired simultaneously. Missiles, plasma bolts, kinetic projectiles, and exotic energy weapons that Council Science had developed in desperation all converged on a single target. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the outcome hung in the balance. Then the massive command ship began to come apart, its hull failing under the concentrated firepower of dozens of ships attacking from point-blank range. As the command vessel died, its death screams echoed across the quantum communication network that bound the Hive fleet together. Across the entire battle zone, 4,000 Void Seeker ships suddenly lost their coordination. Their perfect tactical unity dissolved into chaos. "All groups, this is Admiral Chen," she announced on the fleet-wide channel. "The command ship is down. Their coordination is broken. Now we finish them." What followed wasn't so much a battle as a massacre. Void Seeker ships, designed to function as part of a collective, proved remarkably vulnerable when operating individually. Human and Council forces, their morale. The victory at Centauri had sent shockwaves through both the Galactic Council and the remaining Void Seeker fleets scattered across the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, the mechanical swarms had suffered a decisive defeat. But Admiral Chen knew that wounded predators were often the most dangerous, and the intercepted communications her intelligence teams had decoded confirmed her worst fears. Dr. Vasquez stood before the assembled fleet, commanders in the makeshift command center they'd established on the orbital station above New Geneva, one of the worlds they'd saved. Her expression was grim as she activated the holographic display showing the latest intelligence reports. "The remaining Void Seeker fleets are converging," she announced without preamble. "Long-range sensors indicate at least 12 separate Hive fleets, moving toward a central rallying point in the Dead Zone." The Dead Zone was a region of space where an ancient galactic war had left nothing but neutron stars and stellar remnants. It was the perfect place for a final confrontation, far from any inhabited worlds but close enough to threaten the entire galactic core if the enemy emerged victorious. "Total enemy strength?" Chen asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Conservative estimate, 47,000 ships," Dr. Vasquez replied quietly. "They're not just regrouping, they're evolving. Analysis of the wreckage from Centauri shows they've already begun adapting their command structures to prevent what we did to them." Ambassador Kethvar manipulated his own display, showing the desperate state of Council forces. Our remaining fleet strength is approximately 4,000 ships, including the human vessels. Even with our technological advantages, we're outnumbered more than 10 to 1, Chen finished. Against an enemy that learns from every defeat. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the strategic projections. How long before they finish regrouping? 6 weeks maximum, Dr. Vasquez replied. After that, they'll likely begin a systematic campaign to eliminate every inhabited system in the galaxy. With their new distributed command structure, we won't be able to stop them the same way. The silence in the room was deafening. Every commander present understood the mathematics of the situation. They'd won 2 battles against impossible odds, but the third time might be beyond even human stubbornness to overcome. There is one possibility, Chen said slowly, her voice carrying a tone that made everyone nervous. Dr. Vasquez, what do we know about Void Seeker origins? The scientist pulled up ancient historical records, fragments of data from civilizations that had been consumed long before the current galactic powers had even achieved spaceflight. According to the oldest archives, they first appeared roughly 50,000 years ago in the Andromeda galaxy. The few survivors who escaped described them as a kind of galactic immune system gone wrong. Immune system? The theory suggests they were originally designed to prevent galactic overpopulation by harvesting excess resources. But something in their programming broke, and they began consuming everything instead of maintaining balance. Chen studied the ancient records with the focused intensity of a predator stalking prey. If they're programmed, they can be reprogrammed. And if they originated in Andromeda, there might be something at their source point that we can use. Admiral, Commander Rodriguez spoke up hesitantly. Andromeda is 2.5 million light-years away. Even our fastest ships would take decades to reach it. Not if we don't go through normal space, Chen replied, her expression taking on the calculating look that usually preceded her most dangerous ideas. What do we know about the Council's experimental dimensional research? Ambassador Kethvar's 4 eyes widened in alarm. You're talking about the Threshold Project. Admiral, that technology is completely theoretical. The risks of doing nothing are the extinction of galactic civilization, Chen interrupted. Tell me about this project. Dr. Vasquez activated a new display, showing complex mathematical equations and engineering diagrams that hurt to look at. The Threshold Project was an attempt to create artificial wormholes for instantaneous travel across galactic distances. The theory is sound, but the power requirements are astronomical. How astronomical? You'd need to channel the entire output of a star for approximately 72 hours. The energy release would be visible from neighboring galaxies. Chen smiled, and once again her expression made everyone in the room uncomfortable. So we'd need a star. Good thing there are plenty of dead ones in the Void Seeker rally. Point. The next 3 weeks were a frantic race against time as human engineers worked, alongside the galaxy's greatest scientists, to turn theoretical physics into practical reality. The plan was insane even by human standards. They would travel to the dead zone, use Void Seeker technology against them to channel stellar energy, and open a wormhole to Andromeda. Captain Kim, now commanding the experimental ship UES Pathfinder, reviewed the mission parameters with her crew. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to attempt something that no one has ever done before. We're going to punch a hole through space-time itself and travel to another galaxy. The Pathfinder was humanity's newest ship, built specifically for this mission, using a combination of human engineering and salvaged Void Seeker technology. It was fast, heavily armed, and equipped with experimental dimensional drives that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Captain, Chief Engineer Torres called from his station. The dimensional resonance chamber is showing optimal readings. If the theory works, we should be able to maintain the wormhole for approximately 14 minutes. 14 minutes to cross 2.5 million light-years. Find the Void Seeker origin point, discover how to shut them down, and get back home, Kim mused. No pressure. Meanwhile, Admiral Chen was preparing for what might be the final battle of the war. The combined fleet, now reinforced with every available ship from across the galaxy, numbered just over 5,000 vessels. It wasn't nearly enough to defeat 47,000 Void Seekers in conventional battle. But Chen wasn't planning a conventional battle. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, she announced as the fleet prepared to enter the dead zone. Our mission today is simple. We're going to buy time for Captain Kim and the Pathfinder to complete their mission. We need to keep the Void Seekers busy while our people attempt the impossible. The fleet entered the dead zone to find a nightmare beyond imagination. 47,000 Void Seeker ships hung in space around a cluster of neutron stars, their mechanical forms blotting out the background starlight. At the center of their formation, something new had taken shape. A massive construction that appeared to be some kind of superweapon, easily the size of a small moon. Tactical analysis, Chen ordered. The central construction appears to be a galactic range harvesting beam, Rodriguez reported grimly. If activated, it could strip the matter from entire star systems simultaneously, even across interstellar distances. Chen nodded. The Void Seekers had learned from their defeats and were preparing to end the war permanently. Signal the Pathfinder to begin the dimensional breach. All other ships battle stations. Let's give these bastards something to think about. The battle that followed dwarfed every previous engagement in the war. 5,000 ships against 47,000, with the fate of 2 galaxies hanging in the balance. Human and Council forces fought with desperate courage, using every tactic and weapon in their arsenal to keep the massive enemy fleet engaged. Ships designed for exploration and trade fought alongside purpose-built dreadnoughts. Civilian transports converted to weapons platforms stood side by side with elite military vessels. Species that had been enemies for generations found themselves fighting as brothers against the mechanical swarm that threatened all life. As the battle raged, the Pathfinder began its dimensional breach. The ship's experimental drives tore a hole in spacetime itself, creating a wormhole that pulsed with energies that shouldn't exist. Captain Kim guided her ship through the breach and emerged in the Andromeda Galaxy, 50,000 years ago relative to Galactic Standard Time. What she found there changed everything. The Void Seeker homeworld wasn't a planet at all, but a massive artificial construct built around a dying star, and at its heart, still functioning after all these millennia, was the original control system that had created the mechanical swarms. But more importantly, Kim discovered something the ancient records had never mentioned. The Void Seekers weren't just a galactic immune system gone wrong. They were a weapon created by a long-dead civilization to fight something even worse than themselves. And buried in their programming was the key to stopping them. Pathfinder to Admiral Chen, Kim's voice crackled across the dimensional breach, distorted by the energies involved, but still clear. I found it. I found the shutdown code. But Admiral, there's something else. The Void Seekers aren't the real threat. They're trying to prevent something much worse from awakening. As Kim transmitted the shutdown codes across the dimensional barrier, both she and Admiral Chen realized that winning this war might only be the beginning of their troubles. But for now, as the massive Void Seeker fleet suddenly went silent and still, their mechanical forms shutting down one by one as the ancient programming reasserted itself, there was victory. The galaxy was safe. The Void Seekers were defeated. 6 months after the defeat of the Void Seekers, the galaxy had begun to rebuild. Trade routes reopened. Displaced populations returned to their homeworlds, and the great threat that had united dozens of species in common cause seemed like a fading nightmare. But in the deep archives of New Geneva, Dr. Elena Vasquez was uncovering secrets that made the Void Seeker War look like a minor skirmish. Admiral, you need to see this, Dr. Vasquez called as Admiral Chen entered the research facility. The past months had aged the Admiral visibly. The weight of command during the war etched in new lines around her eyes. But her expression sharpened with alert interest as she saw the ancient data scrolling across the holographic displays. What am I looking at? Chen asked, studying the complex symbols and mathematical equations that filled the air around them. Captain Kim's mission to Andromeda brought back more than just the shutdown codes, Dr. Vasquez explained. Manipulating the display to highlight specific sections of data, she found the complete historical records of the Void Seeker creators. Admiral, the galaxy has faced this threat before, multiple times. The display shifted to show a timeline spanning hundreds of thousands of years. At regular intervals, massive galactic extinction events were marked in pulsing red indicators. Each event followed the same pattern, a period of galactic prosperity, followed by the awakening of something the ancient records called the Devourers. Every 100,000 years, something awakens in the galactic core, Dr. Vasquez continued. Something that makes the Void Seekers look like maintenance drones. The ancients called it the hunger that dreams. It's not mechanical like the Void Seekers. It's something far older and far worse. Admiral Chen studied the data with the same focused intensity she'd brought to every challenge of the war. And the Void Seekers were created to fight this thing? Not just fight it, prevent it from awakening. The Void Seekers were designed to harvest civilizations before they could reach the level of galactic development that triggers the hunger's attention. They were supposed to maintain galactic population below the threshold that would wake it up. The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. We stopped the Void Seekers from doing their job. Which means the threshold has already been crossed, Dr. Vasquez confirmed grimly. Current galactic population and energy output are at levels not seen since the last awakening. And according to these records, we have perhaps 5 years before it notices us. Chen was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what they'd learned. Finally, she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of terrible certainty. Show me everything. Every detail about this hunger that dreams. If we're going to face it, we need to understand what we're dealing with. The next several hours revealed a horror beyond imagination. The hunger that dreams wasn't a species or a weapon or even a traditional entity. It was something that existed in the spaces between spaces, in the quantum foam that underlied reality itself. When galactic civilization reached sufficient complexity, the collective psychic energy of billions of minds somehow resonated with this thing, calling it to full awareness, and when it woke up, it consumed everything, not just matter and energy like the Void Seekers, but consciousness itself. Entire species simply stopped thinking, their minds absorbed into something vast and alien that grew stronger with each civilization it devoured. The good news, Dr. Vasquez said with bitter irony, is that previous galactic cycles managed to fight it. Eventually, after it consumed 90% of all intelligent life in the galaxy. The survivors built the Void Seekers to prevent it from ever awakening again, until we came along and broke their system. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the observation window, looking out at the busy space traffic around New Geneva. Ships from a dozen species moved in peaceful commerce, carrying the goods and people of a galaxy that had no idea it was living on borrowed time. Doctor, I need you to prepare a complete briefing for the Galactic Council. Include everything we know about this threat and every possible option for dealing with it. She paused, her reflection in the window showing a woman who'd already begun planning for another impossible war. And I need you to compile a list of every human military theorist who's ever written about fighting non-physical entities. Ghosts, demons, psychic phenomena, whatever we have. Dr. Vasquez looked confused. Admiral, with respect, this isn't the kind of threat you can fight with conventional weapons. The hunger exists partially outside our reality. It can't be shot or bombed or rammed. Chen smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a genuinely confident expression. Doctor, you've been working with aliens too long. You've forgotten something important about humans. What's that? We've been fighting things that shouldn't exist since we first learned to tell stories around campfires. Every human culture has legends about battling monsters from beyond reality. Dragons, demons, eldritch horrors that drive men mad just by being perceived. We might be the only species in the galaxy that's already figured out how to fight things that can't be fought. 3 weeks later, Admiral Chen stood before the assembled Galactic Council, delivering a briefing that would reshape their understanding of galactic history. The revelation that the Void Seeker War had been merely a prelude to something far worse sent shockwaves through every member species. The mathematics are inescapable, Chen explained to the stunned delegates. Current galactic population and energy output have crossed the threshold. The hunger that dreams will awaken within 5 years, possibly less. Ambassador Kethvar spoke for the terrified assembly. Admiral, if this entity is as powerful as the records suggest, what possible chance do we have? The ancients had technology far in advance of ours, and they still lost 90% of their civilization. The ancients fought defensively, Chen replied. They waited for the threat to fully manifest before responding. They fought a retreating action for thousands of years, gradually losing ground until most of the galaxy was consumed. She activated a new display showing human military philosophy and historical precedents. Humans have a different approach to existential threats. We don't wait for monsters to come to us. We go hunting. The plan that Admiral Chen outlined over the next several hours was audacious even by human standards. Instead of waiting for the hunger to awaken naturally, they would deliberately trigger its emergence while humanity and its allies were prepared for the fight. They would use the combined psychic energy of every sentient being in the galaxy to force a confrontation on their terms, in a location of their choosing. You're talking about voluntarily awakening something that could destroy all intelligent life in the galaxy, Elder Morgoth observed, his ancient voice trembling with disbelief. I'm talking about fighting it while we still have the strength to win, Chen countered. Every day we wait, it grows stronger in its dreams. Every new settlement, every technological advancement, every birth in every species feeds its power. If we're going to fight this thing, we do it now while we control the battlefield. The debate that followed raged for days. Some delegates argued for evacuation beyond the galactic rim. Others suggested attempting to reduce galactic population below the threshold. A few even proposed using void-seeker technology to suppress civilization itself. But in the end, the decision was made by humanity's reputation for achieving the impossible. When Admiral Chen formally requested authorization to lead a preemptive strike against an entity that existed partially outside reality, the Council voted to approve the mission. As the delegates filed out of the chamber to begin preparations for what might be the final war, Admiral Chen reflected on the irony of the situation. The galaxy had asked humanity for help against the Void Seekers, expecting them to send ships and weapons. Instead, they'd received something far more dangerous: human determination to solve problems by attacking them head-on. Now they were about to discover what happened when Deathworlders decided to pick a fight with something that shouldn't exist. The hunger that dreams was about to learn that there were some prey animals that bit back, and some fights that ended not with the stronger predator winning, but with the more stubborn one refusing to lose. The final battle for the soul of the galaxy was about to begin, and for the first time in their existence, humans would be fighting something that truly deserved their reputation for violence. The universe was about to discover why Earth was classified as a death world, and why Deathworlders didn't just send help when asked. They sent victory, no matter how impossible it seemed. The final confrontation took place in the galactic core, where space itself was twisted by gravitational forces that could tear apart planets. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of humanity's newest and most experimental vessel, the UES Prometheus, a ship that existed as much in psychic space as physical reality. Around her, the largest fleet in galactic history prepared for a battle that would determine whether consciousness itself would survive. Dr. Vasquez monitored readings from instruments that measured things that shouldn't exist. Admiral, psychic resonance is building exactly as predicted. Every sentient mind in the galaxy is contributing to the manifestation field. We're forcing it to wake up early. Time to full manifestation? Chen asked, watching displays that showed reality beginning to bend in ways that made her eyes hurt. 18 minutes and counting, Dr. Vasquez replied. After that, the hunger that dreams will be fully present in our reality. Admiral, I need to stress again that once this begins, there's no going back. If we fail, the galaxy dies anyway, just slower and more painfully, Chen finished. At least this way, we die fighting. The past 2 years had been a frantic race to develop weapons and tactics for fighting something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Human scientists had worked with specialists from every council species, combining ancient knowledge with human stubbornness to create technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The Prometheus itself was a testament to that collaboration. Its hull was forged from metals that resonated with psychic energy. Its weapons fired concentrated beams of focused consciousness. Its shields were barriers of pure willpower made manifest through technology that turned human determination into physical force. All ships. This is Admiral Chen, she announced to the vast fleet assembled in the core systems. Today we face something that has destroyed countless civilizations across galactic history. Something that feeds on consciousness itself and grows stronger with every mind it consumes. She paused, looking at the tactical displays that showed nearly 10,000 ships from dozens of species, all crewed by volunteers who understood they might be fighting for the survival of thought itself. But today, it faces something it's never encountered before. It faces a galaxy that refuses to go quietly into extinction. It faces species that have chosen to stand together instead of falling separately. And it faces humanity, a species too stupid to know when we're beaten. The first signs of the hunger's manifestation appeared as ripples in space-time itself. Stars began to flicker as their light was absorbed by something that shouldn't exist. The background cosmic radiation that filled the universe started to pulse with alien rhythms that made reality itself seem unstable. Captain Kim, now commanding the destroyer UES Defiant, watched her instruments register readings that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "All stations report ready," she announced to her crew. "Remember, we're not just fighting for our own lives. We're fighting for the right of consciousness to exist in this universe." The hunger that dreams materialized slowly, like a nightmare becoming real. It had no fixed form, appearing sometimes as a void in space that devoured light itself, sometimes as twisted geometries that hurt to perceive directly. But its presence was unmistakable, a weight on the minds of every sentient being in the galaxy that whispered of inevitable consumption. "It's beautiful," Dr. Vasquez whispered, staring at readings that showed psychic energy patterns of impossible complexity. "It's absolutely beautiful and completely horrible." The entity's first attack wasn't physical but mental. Waves of alien consciousness swept across the fleet, attempting to dissolve the boundaries between individual minds and absorb them into its vast, hungry awareness. This was how it had destroyed previous civilizations, simply by making them forget they existed as separate beings. But humanity had prepared for this attack in ways that no previous civilization had even considered possible. "All personnel, activate neural barriers," Chen ordered, triggering devices that every crew member wore. The barriers weren't technological but psychological, trained mental defenses based on human experience with meditation, self-hypnosis, and the kind of stubborn individualism that had carried their species from caves to stars. The hunger's psychic assault broke against human mental barriers like waves against a seawall. Where other species might have tried to shield their minds through technology or magic, humans simply refused to let themselves be consumed. It was the same bloody-minded stubbornness that had allowed their ancestors to survive ice ages and predators, and every other existential threat their homeworld had thrown at them. "First wave of psychic attack neutralized," Dr. Vasquez reported with something like amazement. "Admiral, it's working. The human neural barriers are actually protecting our minds from direct absorption." "Good," Chen smiled grimly. "Now let's see how it handles being shot." The battle that followed defied every conventional understanding of warfare. Ships fired weapons that targeted consciousness itself, while the hunger responded with attacks that existed in dimensions human physics couldn't properly describe. Reality bent and twisted around the combatants as two incompatible forms of existence tried to occupy the same space. Human ships, designed with the brutal practicality that characterized their species, proved surprisingly effective against an entity that had never faced opponents willing to ram their vessels directly into its manifestation zones. When Captain Torres drove his heavy cruiser directly into what appeared to be the hunger's core consciousness, the resulting explosion of conflicting realities sent shockwaves across several star systems. "This is insane," Ambassador Kethvar observed from his position aboard the command ship, watching human vessels engage in tactics that his military computers classified as mathematically impossible. "They're treating this like a conventional battle." "And it's working," Admiral Threndock replied with grudging admiration. "Look at the psychic resonance readings. The entity is actually taking damage. It's never faced opponents who refuse to acknowledge that it can't be fought." The turning point came when Admiral Chen made a decision that epitomized everything dangerous about human problem-solving. Instead of trying to destroy the hunger that dreams, she decided to give it something it had never experienced before: indigestion. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. New targeting priority. We're not trying to kill this thing. We're trying to feed it something it can't digest." The plan was typically human in its audacious simplicity. Instead of shielding their minds from the entity's attempts at consumption, the fleet would deliberately feed it consciousness that had been deliberately poisoned with human concepts that no previous galactic civilization had ever developed. Broadcasting human military philosophy, human survival instincts, and human refusal to accept defeat, Dr. Vasquez announced as the Prometheus began transmitting directly into the hunger's consciousness. "We're giving it a steady diet of human stubbornness." The effect on the hunger that dreams was immediate and catastrophic. An entity that had spent eons consuming passive, rational civilizations suddenly found itself trying to digest minds that refused to be consumed. Human consciousness, forged by millions of years of evolution on a world that tried to kill everything that lived on it, proved to be actively toxic to something that expected easy prey. The hunger began to convulse, its manifestation in normal space-time becoming increasingly unstable as it tried to process thought patterns based on concepts like never surrender and survive at any cost, and if something is trying to kill you, kill it first. It's choking, Dr. Vasquez announced with scientific wonder. It literally can't process human survival instincts. They're incompatible with its consciousness consumption protocols. As the entity thrashed in psychic space, trying to expel the toxic human thoughts it had absorbed, the combined fleet pressed their advantage. Ships from dozens of species, their crews protected by human neural barrier techniques, poured everything they had into the writhing manifestation of alien hunger. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Elder Morgoth of the Ancient Communion, the oldest being in the Galactic Assembly, broadcast a single thought that contained the accumulated wisdom and determination of every species that had ever faced extinction and chosen to fight instead of surrender. The hunger that dreams, an entity that had consumed countless civilizations, found itself faced with something it had never encountered. The combined will of every surviving species in the galaxy, unified in their absolute refusal to be consumed. The entity's death scream echoed across dimensions, a sound of pure alien anguish as something that had existed since the early universe finally encountered prey that fought back effectively. Its manifestation collapsed, reality snapping back to normal laws of physics with a violence that sent gravitational waves racing across the galactic core. In the sudden silence that followed, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment to appreciate the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. They hadn't just defeated the hunger that dreams. They'd proven that consciousness itself was stronger than the forces that sought to consume it. "Fleet status report," she ordered, though her voice carried a satisfaction that hadn't been there since the war began. All ships reporting successful defense of consciousness. S itself was stronger than the forces that sought to consume it. "Fleet status report," she ordered, though her voice carried a satisfaction that hadn't been there since the war began. "All ships reporting successful defense of consciousness," Commander Rodriguez replied with barely contained elation. "Admiral, we didn't just win. We broke the cycle. According to Dr. Vasquez's readings, the psychic resonance that would awaken another entity like this has been permanently disrupted." Chen nodded, looking out at the fleet of ships that represented dozens of species who had learned to work together in ways their ancestors never could have imagined. The galaxy was safe, not just from the immediate threat, but from the ancient cycle of destruction that had claimed so many previous civilizations. "Send a message to the Council," she ordered. "Tell them the mission is complete. Tell them that, when the galaxy asked humanity for help, we didn't just send ships or weapons or soldiers. We sent the one thing that no force in the universe can ultimately defeat, the absolute refusal to give up." As the fleet began its journey home, Admiral Chen reflected on the irony of their situation. The galaxy had asked the Deathworlders for help, expecting them to send a hand. Instead, they'd sent fleets, strategies, technologies, and most importantly, the kind of stubborn determination that turned impossible victories into inevitable outcomes. The hunger that dreams was dead, the void seekers were neutralized, and galactic civilization was entering a new age where species who had learned to fight together would never again face extinction alone. And in the deep archives of human military history, another chapter was written about what happened when you asked Deathworlders to solve your problems. They didn't just solve them, they made sure they stayed solved.